everyone. Welcome to summer school. Our virtual sessions brought to you in partnership with the California Independent Booksellers Alliance, Mountains and Plains Independent Booksellers Association, and Pacific Northwest Independent Booksellers Association. Today's session is the new social code, Five Relational Edges for Thriving in the Age of Intelligence. Indie bookstores still offer something AI and technology cannot copy, the human algorithm. The authors of this upcoming book, The New Social Code, Michael Arena and Greg Pryor, will examine the stories of Mary Shelley, Billie Eilish, Benjamin Franklin, and others to explore the five relational edges for thriving in the age of AI. Learn to deepen customer relationships, strengthen teamwork, spark ideas, and build influence through trust. A guided breakout will follow, as I said. So we've got a lot to cover. So I'm going to pass it over to Michael and Greg. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Oh, Hannah, thank you so much, and thank you, everyone. It feels cool to be at summer school. I don't know. I love that phrase. I don't know. Well, thank you for having us, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for inviting Michael and I to spend some time with you all today. We believe we actually have something in common with you all. While we both care deeply about helping people discover great opportunities. And the difference is you spend your careers connecting readers with amazing books, and we spend our careers connecting people with other people to enable their careers. And that's really going to be what we're going to be geeking out for about the next hour or so. As a super quick intro to build on what Hannah had suggested, between Michael and I, and Michael, I don't know that you're sharing the slides. Maybe not yet. Okay, well, I'll keep going and. But between Michael and I, and you are in, there we go. We're almost there.
You got
And of
them?
course, we're in notes mode still. One more, I think.
My goodness,
Of
this
course,
looks
we
good.
got through this in tech check. We used our chance to get it right in tech check, and it always happens that way. But I'll just keep going, and we'll let the slides catch up. But between both Michael and I, we've led talent organizations at companies like General Motors, Merrill Lynch, AWS, and Workday. And for many years, we've been social network scientists. Michael more than I, definitely more on the science side. And we've been really studying one powerful question. That looks great, Michael, which is how do people apply particular strategies that help cultivate the connections that enable success? And perhaps even more importantly than that, we want to build strategies that people can actually apply. Both Michael and I think about ourselves as what we call pracademics, people who translate decades of research into practical actions that we all can use, including Michael and I tomorrow. Uh, all that said, over the past several years, probably like many of you, we've noticed something pretty interesting that people aren't just excited about AI. There's actually an equal and perhaps maybe even more so for some people, anxiety related to AI. And as Michael and I serve as career coaches, Michael as a business school faculty, a dean of a business school, we're both parents, and probably like some of you, we keep hearing this same question. Will I still matter? How do I stay relevant when AI automates and augments increasing amounts of work? And that question, hearing that question over and over again, really changed the direction of our research. And several years ago, somewhat haunted by this question, we began studying the collaborative consequences of AI, and we went in search of how relationships improve our relevance in this upcoming age of intelligence. Our goal is to help people replace AI anxiety with what we call relational agency, and we'll talk more about that, giving us practical strategies on how to thrive. And that led us to our latest book called The New Social Code. Today, we'd love to share some of the surprising success stories, as Hannah had mentioned, from the book, and particularly some of those strategies. And I'm pretty sure, as Michael is as well, that given your roles as booksellers, that many of the strategies that we're going to share are already probably things that are superpower of yours that you do naturally, but perhaps this allows you to say, oh, let me lean in and do more of that. But before we jump in to some of the content, we'd love to hear from you. Could you perhaps drop in the chat, as Hannah had suggested, how is AI impacting your space? And we use that space word intentionally and broadly to allow you to share it. So if you could drop in the chat quickly, how is AI impacting your space? So we're seeing some positive. It's helping me from a marketing perspective, analytics, to create processes. This is awesome. So we have some real AI power users here already, Michael. No doubt about that. Okay, we're picking up some of the other side of the equation too. Some of the negatives coming in. All right. Well, thank you for your honesty. One thing we know about booksellers is we appreciate your candor. I think any of the booksellers that Michael and I come across, and we'll talk more about some of our favorites in a little bit, we appreciate your we appreciate your candor. Don't turn your back on the robots. All right. Thank you,
Greg, do you
Brian.
mind briefly reading out a couple of those for the people who are viewing this as the recording?
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. So we're seeing things like AI is leading a mass exodus of critical thinking skills in Albaline. We're struggling with the ethics of using AI. Alexis is talking about with the implications. And then we saw on the other side of the equation, people using it for developing processes, inventory analytics, helping do marketing and marketing work. So much the way I hope I didn't overbias us in that first slide is we're seeing the both end. There are people who are very excited, and there's an equal amount of anxiety that we're seeing. And maybe I'll finish it with Brian's comment. Don't turn your back on the robots. Maybe Michael, we'll have you pick it up there.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Thanks so much, Greg. Brian, we want to talk to you after about the time that you did turn your back on a robot. So it's so interesting. And this is why we wrote the book. We wrote the book simply because we believe that there is huge power in artificial intelligence, but equally as important and somewhat diminished if we're not thoughtful in the way that we engage as human beings. There's what we call the human algorithm. So it matters that you're engaging and using AI for things like marketing campaigns and back end operations. But it also matters that there are certain things that we as human beings simply should not give away to the robots, to the computers. And we believe many of those things, not all of them, but many of those things are deeply relational. So we wrote the book to really talk about how computer code, converts intent into machine action, but social code converts intent into coordinated human actions. It turns out that we still motivate people, we still activate people, we still encourage and create a sense of belonging. We still dream with imagination, and so what we're trying to do is bring a hope to those who are frustrated by what's happening with AI, not to refuse the use of AI, but to embrace it, but equally embrace those things that have become more essential from a human standpoint. And really, that's the essence of what we call the social code. The future no longer belongs to those who. I grew up at AWS, Amazon, and we would oftentimes say that it's about the computer programmers that are running the company. And we now believe that the future no longer belongs to those who master code, but to those who master human connections, and can synthesize and empathize with others in what they do. So that's the essence of it. And we oftentimes talk about the speeding bullet train. Like this technology has come at us so fast with a blazing speed, and it's both really intoxicating because it can do so many things so quickly, and really dangerous because while we're on the train, we're missing some things that are really, really important. It turns out that, our nervous systems were calibrated for conversation, not computation. And it turns out that, we grew up and we were shaped on the savannah, interacting with other people, not necessarily, sprinting through circuit codes. And that's in essence what we're trying to emphasize is, this technology is phenomenal. It's so many things. And it's still super embryonic at this stage at things like, how do you read the room? How do you catch, what your book readers are thinking about as they leave, the bookstore? How do you engage in conversation with them? How do you see over the horizon what's coming next? How do you deal with conflict? The models are really bad at dealing with two conflicting perspectives, it actually will average them together. And sometimes that's the worst answer of all. So what we've done is we've started to think about what are those few things that we should be elevating as human beings. And it turns out that, it's always been true that our connections have mattered. It turns out that if you look at the research, your connections, my connections, Greg's connections have always mattered to our success. And if you put it in the workplace context for a moment, future salary increases, overall career satisfaction is really predicated on your ability to maintain your connections across time. Hans Wolf and Hans Moser did this comprehensive study across 3 years where they followed hundreds of employees and hundreds of human beings across their daily interactions. And what they found was they built a model, and what they found was the number one predictor of career success within their model had to do with those people who maintained connections more so than others. And we can look at study after study, which we do in the book. This is just one, and it continues to illustrate the same thing. But there are really 5 critical types of relational edges that seem to matter most. And the things we focus on is how do you find opportunity? How do you actually get outside of the model, outside of the AI, and before the data is ever in the system? And how do you move upstream? How do you find new opportunities? How do you look over the horizon at what's coming next? How do you anticipate what's the new trend so you can place the right books in your store at the right time? And yeah, an algorithm may help you to predict some of that, but it's working in reaction mode. It's not working in a foresight kind of capacity. So you got to look over the horizon. You got to intuitively read what's happening. One of the things we say in the book is that we use psychiatrist Ian McGilchrist's work, and we say that the human brain is really, really good at computing science and being rational. And we would oftentimes call that the left side of the brain. He tries to dispel that myth a bit in his book. But even more importantly, and computers, by the way, are really good at those two things. So we sometimes disguise and fool ourselves to think that computers can think as well as we do. But we're missing 2 dimensions that are really critical that McGilchrist talks about. And that is the art of imagination, the ability to take yourself mentally someplace beyond what the data is telling you, to go into a story, to go into a dream, to anticipate a future, to have foresight about a new vision, a new possibility, and the ability to leverage intuition, to read the room, to see what others are thinking, to watch somebody's reaction as you're talking to them and respond to it. And it turns out that we are over-indexing on science and reason and under-indexing on imagination and intuition. And those are deeply relational, unlike the cognitive abilities of cause and effect, which are we can innately do as an individual. These other things are deeply relational and experiential. And we believe there are 5 relational edges. One is, where do you find opportunity? With the speed of the bullet train, how do you build trust rapidly? How do you quickly surge into a new group or meet a new person and forge trust with them because they're going to be moving quickly out of your life or you out of theirs, and instilling and building trust in a very innate and intentional way really, really matters, authentically, of course. And then how do you maintain attention? How do you go deep into focus? Because one of the things we're seeing in the world is people are becoming even more distracted with AI stacked on top of social media. They're being, sort of running multiple work streams at the same time or using multiple chat tools at the same time. And it's actually distracting them even farther away from intuition and imagination. So we gotta really protect that time. And you do that through the relational fabric. How do you find new insights? How do you actually, again, work across the landscape to see what's beginning to emerge? And then ultimately, how do you influence? And we believe that we as human beings are predominantly feeling creatures that think, not thinking creatures that feel. And that all matters immensely. And we, throughout the book, use anecdotes and stories to sort of showcase this fact that connections really matter. And this is probably our favorite story, Greg and my favorite story. It's recent, you know the story. But in May of 2025, 133 cardinals entered the Sistine Chapel to elect the new pope. And just like everything else in the world, there were procrastinators, there were prediction markets, there were AI models. The AI models were looking at things like, what's their vision? What's each of the individual cardinals' perspective on migration and sexuality and interfaith dialogue and even church governance? The prediction models were just simply using the power of the crowds to figure out who would be the next pope. And the most interesting thing is all those models surfaced numerous cardinals that were fairly well known and have been around for some period of time, but they gave Robert Prevost a 1% chance of being elected as the next pope. And it turns out there was one group in particular that had a very different perspective. And it was a handful of academics in an Italian university that were also studying something, but what they were looking at was Robert Prevost's network. And what they were trying to evaluate was who was connected with who was connected with who inside the College of Cardinals. And it turns out that a relatively unknown cardinal who had only been a cardinal for about 18 months, and according to Pope Francis himself, had come from the ends of the earth. And it turns out that this one individual had connected in a very intimate and authentic way with 2/3 of the College of Cardinals. And we now know the story, that particular pope or that particular cardinal, Cardinal Leo, I'll get it right. Cardinal Robert Provost, I've said it multiple times, ended up becoming Pope Leo through his connections. It was the innate interactions and the trust and the social equity that Robert Prevost had stored up by being actually at the center of the network, by working on multiple committees across multiple regions, and certainly being able to be a trustworthy ear to many of the cardinals that ultimately took him from a relatively unknown person to becoming the next pope of the Catholic Church. And when you look at that story, it's always been true that our relationships have mattered. But when you look at that story and you start to look at that story elsewhere, you can repeat those motions over and over again across different domains. And we certainly see that pattern and share that story throughout the book in regards to different relational edges that can help you stay in front of the algorithms. And one of those is, where do you find opportunity? And I happen to reside on a college campus right now. You've seen all of the video clips of the young generation booing the commencement speakers anytime they would use the letters AI. You would hear them be booed off stage because they were threatened, they were fearful. They know that their ability to find a job seems to at least be in the short term jeopardized or at least at risk. And it turns out that we, Greg and I, wanted to provide hope to those folks that are feeling lost and helping them to see a new narrative, helping them to recognize that opportunity rarely comes from the crowded pond. It usually comes from moving farther upstream and being in proximity to where the decisions are being made before they've ever been finalized. And we love this story. Some know it, many don't. But it turns out in the mid-1970s, Harrison Ford's acting career was really stalled. He had played a couple minor roles. He was in American Graffiti as much more of just like a bystander inside that movie. And his career had stalled. So he did what many of us do. He went out and hustled, and he started to become a carpenter. He wouldn't take roles that he thought were beneath himself, like advertising commercials. So he went out and he decided he needed to help his family, feed his family. He needed an income, so he became a carpenter. And when Star Wars, the casting of Star Wars came along, even though George Lucas had briefly met Harrison Ford, they were acquaintances at best because of the movie American Graffiti, he was never even considered for the primary role of Han Solo. Couldn't even get an audition for it. So Fred Roos, who actually was a very strong advocate of Harrison Ford, asked him to do something really different. And he says, why don't you come join the Star Wars set? Why don't you come use your carpentry skills to help us build the sets? No one knows if this was done intentionally. We haven't had the privilege of being able to interview either of them, and we've combed the literature, so no one knows if this was deeply intentional or how this emerged. But it turns out that Harrison Ford was on set when George Lucas, at one point said, could somebody please get me a consistent voice to read Han Solo's lines so that I don't have variability with people that are reading lines and the variability of the actors. And it turns out that Fred Roos turned and says, well, there's Harrison. Why don't we get him over here? And completely by mistake in many regards, Harrison Ford was asked to read the part as others were cycling through for other roles of Han Solo. And the way the story goes, he was disgruntled, a little bit frustrated with the fact that he was being pushed into this, sort of character, and read it with great disdain. And it turns out that was exactly what George Lucas was looking for. And unlike all those who had read the scripts and had studied and practiced the audition, Harrison Ford read it with this sense of hostility in his voice. And by the end of casting as a stand-in, he literally was given the role that he had never auditioned for. What's the point? The point is, for our young generation, for each of us, for those of us who are, in ventures, for those of us who are trying to anticipate what's the next giant wave of, books or whatever else is happening in pop culture, how do we move upstream? How do we actually move to where opportunity is? And how do we actually begin to think and use our weak ties to think about our acquaintances in order to move upstream to see where opportunity is forming? And that's exactly what we encourage in the book. We tell stories, we use research, and most importantly, we get to practices that can help people to actualize this. And we know that, if you can just find a referral that, like Fred Roos, who can pull you in, you're 5 times more likely to land a job, land an opportunity, get that, big break in being able to do your product pitch. And we know that your closest friends are usually not the people you go to find those things, because they already know the same things that you know. You're far better off following what we call the Goldilocks rule, which is to find, some people that are just outside of your ongoing interaction circle, those acquaintances, maybe that you had a simple encounter with in the bookstore or a simple encounter with in a parking lot, and then following up with them. And that's where opportunity really emerges. And that's exactly what we found with what we call these fast finders. They're the people that can find opportunities sooner or faster than anyone else, just like Harrison Ford. And we know that they leverage their weak ties. We know that they cultivate broad-based connections, not just close friends. They move upstream to where opportunity is beginning to emerge. And that may mean something like even moving geographies, as we illustrate throughout the book in a couple stories. And sometimes they even go backwards to activate friends that they've interacted with in the past that they've lost touch with, to find out what's beginning to emerge. And this is exactly what we try to do the whole way through to really elevate these practices and then quickly get to what are some tools. One of our tools, and this is an example of a tool we're going to engage you in, a different example later, is how do you go find 20 dormant ties? Who are those 20 people that are probably close to something that you're doing and you just lost track with them, not because you didn't want to stay in touch, but time just happened to get in the way, or you move cities. How do you reconnect with 15 of those people with a casual update? How do you then try to have 5 conversations with 5 of those 15 people? And then ultimately, once you've and there's a very nuanced way to do this, once you've re-engaged with them and found out what they're up to these days, how do you get to a strategic ask? And we say in the book, one of our hardest things to do as human beings is to ask for help. And there are some subtle ways to be able to do that. And we call that building the Blitz Bridge in order to activate some dormant ties that help you to move upstream and find opportunity. And that's just one of the five edges. Trust is another big edge. And Greg, I think I'm going to turn it over to you to take us through this one.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. And just so that people, we're going to provide you, make all of these plays available to you, playbooks available to you, so you're welcome to use them. Welcome to use them with members of your store, and so all this material will be available. Yeah, if we could go into the next, our next success story or relational edge is about someone many of you may already know, and specifically that's Billie Eilish. Most people assume that her career began, like many pop stars today, with a very planned, a very thorough plan. In fact, if you know the story of Billie Eilish, it didn't at all. Her breakthrough song, Ocean Eyes, was originally recorded as a favor for a dance teacher. At the time, Billie was 13, and she and her brother actually recorded this song as a favor to the dance teacher. They put it out on SoundCloud, and it went viral. Ultimately connecting it back to a previous colleague or producer that Phineas had worked with in the past, and brought a trusted manager together. And what we know about this from a research perspective, what we want to share is this idea of activating deep trust. Our good friend and colleague, Amy Edmondson, who's a professor at Harvard University, wrote on this very extensively. It's this idea that you may already be familiar with called psychological safety. And the power of psychological safety, the power of having trusted people, believe it or not, creates this creative environment that when you can experiment, when you have deep levels of trust with those people around you, you get this benefit of incredible creativity and incredible trust. Again, one of these things that we don't believe, at least as far as we can see today, that AI really produces. And this is an opportunity for us to lean into this sense of trust, because we know that it can really change careers. We had actually, at the same time that Billie's song was coming out, believe it or not, a number of colleagues and I had written an article that appeared on the cover of the Harvard Business Review, where we identified this idea of fast movers, and we think Billie Eilish is a fast mover. These are people who intentionally build this sense of deep trust, especially when you have a new relationship. In fact, through a series of particularly learnable strategies and skills, fast movers can replicate the network of what we call high performers 3 times faster than your peers. So if you've got a new member coming into your bookstore, if you're new to a project, if you're new in a community relationship, this idea of applying these fast mover practices can be very, very powerful. In fact, we see that people who apply these strategies sort of outperform their peers by 20% in the first year. They earn top performance ratings, and they particularly get this 13% boost in job performance by listening. One of the things that warms my heart is that people who connect quickly, like a Billie Eilish, who build this sort of sense of trust, tend to feel that they're part of the team, or that they're no longer a newbie in about half the time that it takes other people. One of the things that we know the fast movers sort of understand, maybe it's consciously or unconsciously, is that our brains actually process new people as foes until friends. I mean, physiologically process. Fast movers in fact, recognize this, and they create this idea of being pulled into the network rather than trying to push themselves into a new job. And so by building that friendship quickly, by looking out for one another, by being what Adam Grant in the book you may have all sold called Give and Take, being a giver versus a taker is a real accelerator when being part of a new team. And so while we don't have proper time to delve into all of these strategies, we wanted to highlight very quickly the 4. What we know is that fast movers engage experts early. They show up with humility and respect with those experts, and those experts really help them fill any type of capability gap. That ultimately results in them being seen as a problem solver. Like Billie Eilish, they generate about 2.5 times more positive interactions, which gets them pulled into the network's center more quickly. So they're very intentional about engaging in ways that build this sense of sort of friendship. On the next slide, we talk about this idea of this somewhat obscure piece of network science research by a professor called Scott Field. His research revealed this sort of mathematical anomaly that, believe it or not, on average, your friends your friends have more friends than you. And that's because, from a math perspective, actually, networks rely on these incredibly connected hubs of people. And when you're new to a team, we encourage people, or new to a project, or new to helping something in the bookstore, new to an idea that you're moving forward, finding these super connectors, these people who can help you talk through a particular topic, are really critical. And he suggests five sort of very simple but powerful things you can do. First is to really get active with your network in your bookstore, in your community, in other things in your life. Find those key connectors. And then ask those key connectors to provide you a warm introduction. That's a really powerful, again, I'm not suggesting anything you already don't know, but you'll be surprised. I'm surprised at how often people don't use a warm introduction to get them introduced. When you've identified people who are particularly thoughtful in a topic, notice the patterns. We may say, gosh, the person to go to here is Hannah. I have 4 or 5 conversations, and Hannah's name continually comes up with as someone who can help me do a particular piece of marketing or a particular project. Then when I go to Hannah, I want to lead with value. I want to be able to offer something interesting and unique to Hannah. And then while it shouldn't be, well, it should be a common courtesy, it's often not common sense, is just following up with that thank you. And then if Michael was the one who connected me with Hannah, including Michael in that thank you. Hey, Hannah and I had a chance to connect. These are the things I'm learning. Michael, I really appreciate you doing that. And we don't have time to geek out on all the research related to gratitude, but it is incredibly powerful. So we're going to jump over attention for a moment, and we're going to get into our last relational edge for today, which is around insights. And that brings us to one of our favorite stories in the book, and someone who you may actually know. I know Hannah knows, and that's the story of Cal Crosby. In the book, we had the privilege to interview Cal and to hear some of his experiences, and it was incredibly heartwarming for those of you who might know Cal. Cal's career was deeply influenced by his grandmother, who taught him this idea of what he refers to as radical generosity. And she scraped together, really, the limited funds she could have to enable Cal to visit his local bookstore, the King's English in Salt Lake, where he grew up. Cal's career as a bookseller then really blossomed in the Bay Area, where he was part of book passages, and then connected with this community. One of the amazing things, if you know Cal, for those who do, is that he practices that generosity that he learned from his grandmother. And in fact, he actually started a free consulting business to help people support their operations. And that really did 2 things. One, it allowed him to learn and grow throughout the network, and it built his reputation, as we talked about earlier, as a giver versus a taker. And then for those of you who know the story of Cal, that door reopened back at the King's English, and he now runs the King's English and has just an amazing business there. I had a chance to visit with him a couple of weeks ago, and it was a special day and just amazing. Cal is one of these people we call a fast spanners. And these people cultivate about 2 to 3 times of the bridging connections across diverse contexts. The diversity of connections enable them, as Michael had talked about, to see ideas sooner and earlier. They're able to produce what we refer to, or what's referred to in the literature as hot streaks. People are like, wow, that person has a hot hand. They know the right company to go to. They know the right bets to make. Very often that these are people who see around these corners or edges because they've got these insights from folks like Cal, who have very broad perspectives. They're also, from a dollars and cents perspective, they are 20% more likely to be promoted faster than their peers. And actually, from a compensation perspective, they earn about 16% more over time because they have become more valuable in the network, not only through what they know, but how they unlock what they know through who they know. Fast spanners are more likely to apply the four strategies that Michael and I have sort of revealed in the research. They spend more time being curious, like Cal is. Hey, let me see what's going on in that particular store. They end up filling this void by exploring outside their immediate domain. They're just fundamentally more curious people. Steve Jobs would be an example of someone who Michael has written about in previous books, who are always sort of pushing the borders and learning new things. They tend to be selfless in connecting people across silos. They're the super connectors who bring people together to sort of amplify collective capability. And it turns out, as we see in the research, they end up making more lateral career moves across projects. And ultimately, that allows them to have different career experiences, to learn new things. If you know the story of Cal, he had come out of the hospitality industry when he moved to the Bay Area. The last thing he wanted to do was to get back anywhere near the hospitality space. The first thing they asked him to do at Book Passages was to go into the cafe. And he's like, that's why I got out of hospitality. But he knew that domain. He was amazing at it, and it helped him promote sort of his internal capabilities. One of the other fast spanners that we talk about in the book is Benjamin Franklin, believe it or not. I know Hannah was talking about her trip to Philadelphia earlier, or channeling a little bit of that. Benjamin Franklin actually was this incredible connector, and it's why he sat at sort of this really interesting space in his network. When we talk about Ben Franklin in the book, one of the really fascinating things he did was create something called a weekly junto. And junto comes from the Spanish word of bringing people together. And it united professionals from all of these different backgrounds in Philadelphia. In fact, we talk about in the book that he learned this not in Philadelphia, but he had seen it when he was living in Europe. The difference in Europe was it was only for the exclusive, successful, incredibly rich people. And Ben Franklin wasn't allowed, believe it or not, thinking back on it, was not allowed into these communities. So when he returned to America, he said, I'm going to create these for the more common people, providing this access to other folks. And so just as a little bit, we really encourage people to create your own juntos, to provide opportunities to bring diverse perspectives together, like the session that Heather is doing today. If you're familiar with the book Never Eat Alone, our friend Keith Ferrazzi actually has made an entire career out of having juntos. He invites people to his home, to his restaurant, to restaurants, and he brings them together. And so what we're not maybe suggesting that you should create a career like out of juntos like Keith does. Although my guess is your bookstores are probably the types of environments that are these catalytic spaces, that are these crucibles where different people get together and learn new ideas. But the sort of our suggestion on the junto is 5 simple practices. First, think about inviting people who come from different perspectives, much like Benjamin Franklin did. Then have a series of questions. In the playbook, we're happy to provide you, and we hope you use with your teams or with others. Benjamin Franklin actually had a series of questions. They're a little dated now. We've updated some of those, but where you can ask people to spark that sense of discovery. Inviting sort of outside in thinkers. We all know who they are. It's people who are a little bit more provocative. And then allow people to share the work that they're doing, surface projects and passions at the end of this meeting, and then make it action oriented. One of the perhaps fascinating stories to me, I'm part of our, as Michael knows, our local volunteer fire department here in New Jersey. I know in California, when I lived there, we don't have volunteer fire departments. We leave that up to the professionals. But believe it or not, in Jersey, we let volunteers like me be part of the fire department. The first volunteer fire department came out of one of Benjamin Franklin's juntos. They realized a need. People were talking about an interest and a passion to basically put out fires, but there was no organized system for people to do that. And so the first actually volunteer fire department came out of one of these juntos. So we suggest that it could be a powerful way for you to activate that network. we're going to sort of pivot to, we promise some of these resources to you before we get into the activity. We might even have a couple of minutes for questions. We'd love you to challenge us with questions. But we did want to let you know that we are absolutely, we're big fans of the bookseller community. We're grateful for Cal and others who have been incredibly, Hannah and others. And so we would love you to sort of join the social code movement, to talk about the importance of connections, to have access to these tools. And so if you do go to newsocialcode.com, I'll drop that in the chat as Michael sort of closes out a couple of ideas. Newsocialcode.com. If you put in the code books, pretty much, I don't know that it even have to be a capital books, but if you put in the code books, you will get access to all of the tools that we talked about. We'd love to invite you to some VIP webinars, and we're happy to connect and be of any support we can to your store. So feel free to do that. I'll drop that in the chat as we talk. And then Michael, we'd love to get any questions or comments.
Yeah, in a minute, we're going to engage you in one of these little activities just to demonstrate the power of it so that you can experience it. But in the spirit of being fast movers, we've got a few moments here now to ask you, do you have any questions? Anything coming up for you that you would like to ask about at this stage before we pivot into the next segment?
Final activity, yeah.
And you can come off mute and ask that question if you have it.
Hannah, can we put you on the spot? Apologize. You're going to be like, you never invited back. Was from our discussions previous, or as people are thinking, anything that strikes you as particularly relevant for the booksellers that you support, or interesting from a personal perspective in some of the things we shared?
Yeah, I mean, I see a lot of like the tips that you were sharing with us and the process that you're sharing with us. I kind of already see it happening. It's like, oh yeah, but it's a good reminder to us all to be like, okay, so the social, like the community events we're hosting in our store, they're important and we know this, but it's good to be reminded that it's a place where, advancements come from, connections are made. So we're doing like the good work, and thinking about, I think there was one other thing, the connections that we have. I think it's important, especially for like if you're newer to a community, like if you're moving your bookstore into a new place or you're just opening up your bookstore, is to ask for help, and to find your connections, and don't be afraid to say like maybe to your kid's second grade teacher, hey, I would love to do, I can offer educator nights. Who do I talk to in the district about it? And try to get those kind of things. So just a reminder that it is the human connection that really makes our jobs better and worthwhile, and help us succeed. Yeah.
Those are great. Thank you, Hannah, for sharing. I appreciate it. Apologies for putting you on this
No
spot.
worries.
Those are spot on.
Yeah.
And Megan did have a question. The answer to your question, Megan, is we did not write the book with AI. We did do research with AI. I will tell you though that we were very, very fierce that nothing was directly taken from the AI. We went back to the original resources in every single case. I guess the best way to say that is we used it as a screening tool to get us like pointed in the right direction. And we were trying to be very adamant about that. So hopefully, if you read it, you will see that as it's very embedded with some pretty deep research. So I think that any other final questions before we pivot to, we're going to come back together at the end, but before we pivot to the next little activity, any other final questions? And
I have a very quick question for you and Greg. Do you want to be included in the breakouts, or do you want to stay out of the breakout rooms with me?
We do not need to be included.
Got it. Okay, I was just double checking.
Thank you for asking. Now I gotta get back to figure out how to share my screen. Give me just one second. We will make sure these questions we're about ready to share with you are posted so that you can see them in your breakout groups. But I would just strongly encourage you real quickly so we don't stall you, because we're doing this fast. In the next 10 minutes, we would just ask you to also maybe just jot down one or two of these questions. So too many clicks for me, sorry.
It's okay.
So here's what we'd like you to do. One of the tools in the book is something we call the Fast Friends protocol, or Fast Friends question. And this is also predicated on some deep research. In 1997, Arthur and Elaine Aaron actually were interested in one simple question. How can we get two strangers to quickly develop a close relationship with one another? It turns out that we think relationships, deep relationships, take a lot of time to form, and that's only partially true. If you ask the right questions, it turns out you can develop fast trust really, really quickly. So what they did was, like great academics, they built 36 questions, they tested them in laboratories, and they paired people up and really challenged them to ask a number of different questions that were fairly vulnerable to many. Had some contagion aspects to them, but most importantly, elicited fast connections with people. And these are techniques that anyone could use in a dinner, in a get together, being a new employee, stepping into a company, or just really sitting down across the table from someone, even inside of a bookstore, to ask a few questions to really build rapport in a rapid fashion. So there are 36 of these questions. We're not giving you 36. In a moment, we're going to have you pair up with one other person, and we will ask you to ask just two of these questions because you're not going to have time to do them all, but pick one of the I'm curious questions, and then listen to each other, share that same question with one another, and then pick a second question, around tell me more. And we're going to give you just, again, the next really like 10 minutes or just a little bit less before we come back. And that's what we would like you to do during the breakout.
I think we're all here. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Michael and Greg, for being here with us and sharing your book with us and your theories. We had a really great conversation while you were all in the breakout rooms about, the importance of talking about human connection in the context of tech. Because we are in this world right now of tech and AI. So we really appreciate you reminding us of the good human connection work that we do on a day-to-day basis. And thank you so much and congrats on your book. And if for all of those that are still here with us, if you're enjoying summer school sessions, we have two more left next Wednesday, and I wrote this down so I wouldn't forget. We have Edelweiss Omnibus for booksellers, one platform built for every shop. So please join us again. And again, I think our wonderful summer school sponsors, Source Books, Edelweiss Omnibus, and Ghost Buyers. Without them, our summer school sessions wouldn't be as supported. So thank you so much for their support. And thank you again to Greg and Michael and Brian and Heather who are here as well. Thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks.